Hello, I'm Evan Williams, and I'm going to tell you another story. The story is going to be about how things basically fall into your lap, and you wonder where in the world this came from. Start off with a little poem to get you guys loosened up a bit. Where dips the rocky highland of Sleuthwood in the lake, there lives a leafy island where flapping herons wake, the drowsy water rats. There we've hid our fairy vats, full of berries and the reddest stolen cherries. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. And since this world is so full of weeping, I always tell my students to step out of it. And it's kind of like being in the world and living in the world, but yet you're out of it. You're not of it. You're just out of it. Kind of like a spectator. And so you're doing everything that everybody else is doing, but you're out of it. Because for the world is more full of weeping than you can understand. And so when you step out of it, this is when things start to fall right into your lap. And you're wondering, people ask the questions, oh no, what's going to happen to me? Oh, it's so scary out there. And so they lock themselves up, and that's it. And so, especially my young students, especially the teenagers, they're just starting to dream and stuff. And I give them little pieces of advice. I'm like, well, you should try this. And some of them come to me and say, oh, Mr. Williams, do you think I could write? Do you think I could be, maybe a writer or a producer? And I was like, well, if you could stand maybe not making it for 15 years and eating suhariki late at night because you can't afford grechka, then maybe you'll make it. If you're not afraid of dying, if what you love so much is you won't even let death move you to the left or to the right, then you'll make it. But what I wanted to talk about is hidden hands and how these things literally fall out of the sky. These things we read about only in fairy tales, but I want to talk to you about how they actually happen, how things just, boom, fall right into your hand, and you don't have time to think where it came from because it happens so fast. But give yourself a year or 2 years and then look back and be like, oh man, that really happened? Oh yes, it did. And so I'm going to give you a little story about how when I was in Alaska, and I was just kayaking, and soon the winter crept in. And some of the lakes and some of the muskegs started to freeze up. Even the bay started to freeze. And so I would have to drag my kayak several kilometers down to where I could finally put it in the water and kayak. And during that winter, a couple of my neighbors, they ran out of food. They were running low, and they didn't prepare for the winter. And I didn't prepare either. Because all summer, the Alaskan summer is so beautiful. You go kayaking at night and you see northern lights and these pink and purple lights just flashing around in the sky like in some kind of love dance. And it's, it's completely natural, these stars everywhere. And so all summer I was just totally absorbed in the aesthetics and the beauty of my surroundings, that I wasn't thinking about, oh, I need to stock food for the winter. No, I was just totally partying on the kayak, looking at things. It was a huge party. And so, yeah, winter came and we all started running out of food. And everyone was like, oh no, what are we going to eat? We can't even get to the grocery store because all of the roads are all frozen over and the bay was frozen over and we were stuck on this little island and snow kept coming down and it was very cold. And so people came up with the idea that, Evan, you have to go get a deer. You have to get us a deer. And I was like, well, I'm not a hunter. I've never hunted in my life. And my buddy Jesse was like, well, I'm going to teach you. So he gets this 30-30 Remington where you cock the handle like that and the bullet chambers and you have this great big scope. And I'd never worked with anything like this. And Jesse says, yeah, I'm going to take you in the backyard, teach you how to shoot this thing. And they thought that I would be a good hunter because I was always very quiet when I was walking through the forest, just tiptoeing. I was very quiet. So yeah, you could sneak up on anything. And nobody could do it. And some of the neighbors were really old. They were senior citizens. So there's no way they could have climbed a mountain and, find a deer and shoot it. So Evan, you're going to do it. So I was like, well, I'm kind of it's kind of like when my older brother told me to take the cat and throw it in the oil. I'm just one of these persons, well, if somebody tells me to do something, I'll do it. So my brother said, take the cat and throw it in the oil. I didn't know what to do, so I took the cat and threw it in the oil. My grandfather ran out with his belt and started whipping me. I was like, ah! He said, why did you do that? I was like, because he told me to. And so, they told me, do this. I was like, okay. So I'm out there with the gun, and we're practicing with some bottles, and I shoot it, and kaboom! It hurts my shoulder. I'm like, man, this isn't fun. So I kept practicing. He was like, well, yeah, you have pretty good aim. At about 50, 75 yards, you're hitting the bottle. So when you creep up on a deer, you look at the heart, the chest area and the heart, and if you hit him with a 30-30, he'll just fall down and die. And so I was like, well, I'm going to take one for the team, and I'm going to go out and do this and try to get meat and give the meat to the whole community, because everyone was getting hungry. And people, a lot of the people in Alaska, they're like subsistence, fishermen and hunters, and you can't really grow anything, but in the summer, there's always deer hunting and tons of fishing, and you're supposed to fill up your freezer with food to eat throughout the winter. Kind of like in Ukraine, in the underground, they put their cabbages and potatoes there, and their kwashenaya kapusta and all that stuff, and they eat it during the winter months. So in Alaska, the same thing, but we were running out of food. So what did I do? I started climbing this big mountain. It was called Twin Mountain. It's on the Prince of Wales Island. And I went up to Twin Mountain, and I just kept hiking, and soon I got into alpine, and then I got into some old growth forests. And right there, I saw deer poop. And poop comes from the movie Go Fetch Me a Soda, You Fat Poop. Erin doesn't have any friends. If anybody can tell me what movie that's from, you get automatically 500 points. I'll give you a hint. Throw Mama from the choo-choo. Please, somebody write me the answer. So I saw the deer scat, and I touched it, and it was warm. And then I saw the tracks. I was like, oh, a deer had just been here. So I'm with my little rifle. I have my Dyadia Fyodor hat on. I look exactly like Dyadia Fyodor. And I'm like going in Alaska, and I'm hiking up, and I have my little gun. I had never shot anything before. When I was 13 years old, my dad got me a BB gun. And so I started running around the neighborhood, shooting people's cars and shooting people's mailboxes. And one time I shot a window out, and all the neighbors got together and came and said, no, you have to take the gun away from him. And my dad first, he hit me with the gun, and then he broke it, and that was the end of my gun. My father was like, no. My whole family are military. My dad military, grandfather fought the Germans, my brothers are military. Me, I never joined the military. I don't know anything about guns. I stay away from guns. Now I had this huge gun, and I had to shoot a deer. And finally I was creeping up the mountain, and boom! I looked around one tree, I looked around another tree, and kaboom! The deer was there, sitting like 5 meters from me. And that's the deer that I had been following. And I looked at it, and it was not a buck. I was supposed to shoot a buck. It was a doe. A doe, a female deer. You can't shoot does. If you shoot does, there'll be no offspring. Then there'll be no deer. But I remember before I went up, Jesse told me, yeah, even if you see a doe, kill it, because we need to eat. So there was a doe there, and right there, and this doe had never seen a human being before. And this was like the first time I'd gotten up close to a wild black-tailed deer. And so it stopped and was totally frozen, and I kind of froze up. So I was like, okay. And I put the rifle up, and I looked into the scope, and right on the crosshairs I had the heart, and the deer is supposed to be like 75 yards away. No, this thing was like 5 steps in front of me. I was like, man, I'm going to blast a hole in this thing. And finally, it was such a peaceful moment. I kind of looked through the scope at the deer's face, and it had the most beautiful face. She was like a beautiful deer. And all of a sudden, I put the rifle down. I was like, oh man. I was like, I cannot shoot this thing. This thing is so beautiful. It looked like Bambi with these big, beautiful eyes, and it was looking at me. And I kept making this noise like, I was trying to make this deer noise, but every time I made that noise, its ears would go up and it wouldn't move. The only other time I heard that noise is when my buddy Igor tried my borscht and he had stomach indigestion. It was like he was dying. It was like, "Arr, arr," because he tried my borscht. But this deer, every time I made that noise, yeah, it would freeze. And then it would hop away from me, like 3 or 4 steps. And then I would very quietly follow it. And then it would look at me, and I would look at it, and I would make these noises. And then it would hop away 4 or 5 steps. And then I would follow it. And at this point, I had already made up my mind, no way, I'm not going to shoot this thing. This thing is amazing. I'm just going to watch where this thing leads me. Anyway, to make a long story short, I spent all day following this deer. Because I wanted to see where this thing, I thought this thing was going to take me somewhere, to like some kind of deer paradise. So this forest was beautiful, old growth. So I followed this deer all day, and it took me down these really cool trails and stuff. And I kind of told the deer, I was like, look, we have an agreement. I will not shoot you. Just take me to some place really cool. And it totally did. It took me down these places in this mountain I had never been before. And at the end of the day, I was like, look, man, the sun's going down. I got to go. I was like, tell your friends about me. I'm out of here. So I turned back and I went home. When I went home, it was already dark. I made it there by kayak. And Jesse and Amy and everybody jumping around. I was like, hey, where's the deer? You're supposed to come with the deer. I was like, no. I was out there all day. I didn't see anything. You know, it's too cold. The deer, or they're all hiding. And they kind of looked at me like, oh. I was like, yeah, I'll try again tomorrow. But anyway, at that point, I had already made up my mind. I cannot shoot these things. They're so wonderful. And so I put on my little thinking cap. I was like, well, how am I going to get food? Everybody needs food. We're all hungry here. So I jumped on my kayak. I paddled into town the next day. And at this school, it's kind of like a small village school, there was a Spanish teacher. She was always really mean to me. I don't know why. I was always nice to her. And I always used to come in and talk to the students. But I used to try to practice Spanish with them because I had just come from La Tigra in Tegucigalpa from Honduras. So I was all crazy about speaking Spanish. So I'd always come to the students and practice Spanish. I'd say, hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo te llama? Oh, mucho gusto. And the students would practice Spanish with me. And this Spanish teacher apparently got angry or something. Like I was trying to take her job or something. I was like, no, I'm just being friendly. And she was really mean to me and very cold. I was like, oh, I know what kind of person you are. And I totally stayed away from her. And so when I was in town, I was just walking around town, just trying to figure stuff out. Like, what am I going to do? We got to get some food. The principal of the school came running out of the school, and he got me. He's like, Evan, the Spanish teacher fell sick. She's really sick. We don't know what to do. We need a substitute Spanish teacher. I was like, oh man, mutual arising. Bam! Happened again. I got this job. I taught for 1 month Spanish. I had a blast with the kids. We were just playing all these games, screaming at each other in Spanish. I even taught them like these really nice poems. Let me think of a Spanish poem. ¿Qué es mi barco, mi tesoro? ¿Qué es mi Dios? La libertad, la ley, la fuerza y el viento. La única patria, la mar. My only country is the sea. So I was teaching them all of these poems, and I taught there for 1 month, and at the end of the month, the school gave me a check for $2,000. I was like, what? In English, if you're surprised about something, you say, what? $2,000. I was like, in Alaska, $2,000 can last you like 5 years. Why? Because you live on float houses. In float houses, you don't pay taxes. You live for free. The heating is for free. How do you heat? You chop down a tree and you make a fire. And so the only money you spend in Alaska is on food. But then again, you catch all your food in the form of fish and deer. And so I was like, $2,000. Oh man, mutual arising. Oh my gosh. I took a boat to Ketchikan. I went to the supermarket. I just bought all of this food. I took the boat back into the Prince of Wales Island. I filled the front of my kayak. I filled the back of my kayak. And I felt so good kayaking back home. And I was going to give food to everybody that needed it. And I was like, well, where did the food come from? It just fell right into my lap. That's what I'm telling you. How things just fall into your lap. And when I was kayaking home, it was the greatest feeling. I was like, it's all because of that deer. I didn't shoot the deer. I was real nice to it and I just followed it all day. And basically, the deer must have made some sort of deal that says, okay, you spared my life, I'm going to hook you up. I was totally hooked up. And I kayaked back and I hooked up everybody. That's a new word for you, to hook up. Hook somebody up. So I hooked everybody up with food who needed it. And then I collapsed down in my chair in my cabin and I set a fire and I looked out the window and I watched the tide come in and I was like, oh man, mutual arising really works and it makes you this happy.